Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Jersey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, August 4th, and we will hear Thinking Bigger and Smarter, Climate, Money, and Beyond. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the Q&A box, and I will do my best to answer those. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in that Q&A box. We will get to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And I will ask that if your question is for a particular panelist, that you state their name in your question. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2023. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by the APA Private Practice Division. So thank you for joining us. Up on your screen, we have one more session in, actually, this one might be put off, the August 18th one. We have our whole fall lineup ready to go for September and October, and we'll be releasing that probably in the next week or so. So you can register for all of our upcoming sessions by heading over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And hot off the presses, in our fall lineup, we do have a law session. So stay tuned for that for those that need their law credits. Speaking of credits, today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM or one of the sustainability and resilience required credits. You can log them by heading over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where we post any important date or time changes. I will post when new sessions are available for you to register for, and a weekly reminder for what's on tap. We record all of our sessions. We post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button so that you will be notified every time we have a new session up and available for you to view. If you head over there, you'll see that we have well over 400 session recordings, all available for free. As a final reminder, if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A. If they're content related, we'll answer those at the end during the Q&A. And I will do my best if they're logistic related to help you out with that tech stuff. With that, before we get into further introductions, our panelists today just had a few polling questions for you all. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our first one. And we just want to know who's on the line, who's working where, just so that, you know, they can kind of see who's on the line. So you should receive a pop-up message. Our panelists, unfortunately, you are unable to answer the polling questions. We'll give it another second here. Okay. All right, let's see who's on the line. Majority are public sector, and then coming in second, a little over 25% are private sector. A little bit of academics, a little bit of nonprofit, a little bit of our allied professions. So wonderful. We have two more polling questions. I promise they're quick. Okay. Give it another second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share your results. Ladies, you've got your work cut out for you today, because a whole lot of people are saying, what are these things? And a majority also have not worked with either of these types of funding. Okay, one more question, and then we'll get to things. So I'm launching here. Give it another 3 seconds. Okay. Extra second. Let's share these results here. Are you working in climate tech? 26, yes. 54, no. 20%, I don't really know. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to turn it over to the famous Ramona Malahi, who will kick things off for us today. Ramona.
Thank you, Christine. This is the famous Ramona Malahi. I appreciate it. And along with my presentation, we also have Melissa Hemp, as well as Tiffany Nguyen, who I will introduce at the end of my conversation with you. So first of all, I want to welcome all of you, and as well as thank the Private Practice Division to Thinking Bigger, Smarter, Climate Money, and Beyond. This session will explore how we can identify tools, resources, and innovations that can help inform and advance climate action. Climate change refers to the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns, and these shifts, as we know, may be natural, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change. Changes in weather and climate patterns put lives at risk, as weather phenomena are impacting 1 to 3 people with extreme weather events by a survey in 2022. It might be different for this year. Next. As we confront record heat and the destructive power of flooding, the most vulnerable groups include children, the elderly, outdoor workers, people of color, and people with low incomes are in higher risk due to compounding factors from climate change. Next slide. The accelerating physical consequences of a changing climate have become more pronounced as communities face unpredictable seasonal weather changes, producing severe storms, flooding, wildfires, droughts, extreme heat and cold, poor air quality, and the chronic conditions such as steadily rising sea levels and changing average temperatures. This summer has already brought serious climate-related hazards across the country, including flooding, wildfire, and of course, extreme heat. With record-breaking weather events, we are all feeling its effects. These changes bring a sense of urgency. Next. From a personal vantage point, the climate transition not only creates new responsibilities, but it also creates opportunities. Everyone can help, even in a small personal way, to take action on climate change. From the way we save energy at home, to reducing and recycling food waste, to even eating more vegetables, gasp, and less meat, we can help make a difference. Next. On a community-wide scale, the consequences of changing climate are devastating and expensive, damaging whole neighborhoods and towns. Decarbonizing our society is necessary and urgent. To get there, we will need to look at demanding ingenuity, but also investment. Building climate intelligence and resilience communities are both essential and essential. What are the practical and actionable plans to follow to alter the course of climate change and implement adaptation strategies? A starting point for communities is building and enhancing their resilience to climate-related natural hazards. For example, the HUD Community Resilience Toolkit is a user-friendly guide. It's a basic guide to mitigate the impacts of natural-related hazards and identify funding. In this case, HUD program funding for resilience projects to reduce those risks. Next. What is community resilience? Community resilience is the ability of communities to withstand and recover from disasters and learn from past disasters to strengthen future response and recovery efforts. We talk a lot about what makes a resilience community, but what are the levers we need to get to a resilience community? Some of the global levers to pull or push towards greater resilience include the Paris Agreement, decarbonization, climate coalitions, investments, regenerative land use, a pragmatic understanding of the related strategic issues and interdependencies. How do we meet the moment? What tools, resources, innovations are available to meet the moment? How do we make real progress towards a more sustainable future by the year 2030 and net zero by 2050? Next. Historically, the United States is the country most responsible for greenhouse gases. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is important for curbing future climate change, but communities will also have to adapt to the climate impacts ahead. The pace is quickening as we see. Without action, the world's average surface temperature is likely to surpass 3 degrees centigrade this century. The poorest and most vulnerable people are being affected the most. Affordable, scalable solutions are now available and requires coordinated action to be able to leapfrog to cleaner, more resilient economies. Next slide. The Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative, the first ever whole of government federal environmental justice commitment, benchmarks 40% of federal funding to address environmental issues in disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. To meet the goal of the Justice 40 initiative, federal agencies are changing their programs to ensure the benefits reach disadvantaged communities with embedded focus on equity into the fabric of federal policy making and service delivery. The historic commitment seeks to address environmental injustice in these communities through a variety of ways, through climate change mitigation and adaptation, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transit, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and clean water and wastewater infrastructure. Next. The Justice 40 initiative is not a one-time investment nor a single pot of money. Rather, it is a series of changes to improve how government ensures equitable distribution of the benefits of the many programs we have, both existing and new, including programs created by the President's Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the American Rescue Plan if they meet the eligibility requirements. The Inflation Reduction Act contains $500 billion in new spending and tax breaks that aim to boost clean energy, reduce healthcare costs, and increase tax revenues. Funding of this magnitude compels new partnerships and reframing the way we problem solve. State and local leaders are also key to the success of the IRA. In future years, jobs in solar and other clean energy industries will likely rise even further due to the impacts of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Next. As with most global crises, climate change hurts low-wealth communities the most. Without intentional strategy to address climate mitigation and resilience in these communities, the gap will continue to grow and entire communities will be left behind to suffer. The perils of climate change and the nationwide effort to mitigate and adapt will push this trend even further in the coming decades. The cities that invest in their institutions, reinvent stranded assets, and grow their workforce and innovation sectors will undoubtedly fare the best. Next slide. The recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, considered the largest climate legislation in U.S. history, has the potential to jumpstart an economic transformation. It includes the creation of a $27 billion green financing vehicle to finance clean energy and climate projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, the fund is a pivotal opportunity to bring together climate justice and economic justice. 3 distinct and complementary grant competitions in this fund. The first, $14 billion for a National Clean Investment Fund. The second, $6 billion for a Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. And finally, the $7 billion Solar for All. Together, these competitions will help meet the President's climate goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50 or 52% below 2005 levels in 2030 and achieving net zero emissions by no later than 2050. They also help advance the President's Justice 40 initiative. Next slide. Two examples of network platform coalitions that are trying to drive this transformative climate change resilience solutions and resiliency is first CDFA, or the Council of Development Finance Agencies, which is a national association dedicated to the advancement of development finance concerns. Its members are state, county, municipal development finance agencies that provide support for development financing programs, as well as a variety of non-governmental and private organizations, which include bankers, underwriters, attorneys, financial advisors, and organizations interested in development finance. CDFA is applying to the $6 billion Clean Communities Investment Accelerator to be a nonprofit hub to lead a network of community lenders and technical assistance providers to rapidly build the capacity to make investments in households, small businesses, schools, community institutions in low-income and disadvantaged communities to finance cost savings and pollution-reducing clean technology projects. CDFA wants to reach out to more communities and expands its coalition efforts. Next slide. The second example is the Opportunity Finance Network, OFN, which leads a national network of CDFIs and is a financial intermediary. OFN increases capital flow, strengthens CDFIs, and amplifies the voice of the CDFI industry. Community Development Finance Institutions, CDFIs, include banks, bank holding companies, as well as credit unions, loan funds, venture capital funds. CDFIs finance individuals, they're place-based, they're focused on underserved communities, underserved by traditional finance. There are more than 1,300 certified CDFIs in all 50 states, and nearly 40% of them lend in persistent poverty areas. Certified CDFIs must direct at least 60% of their financial products to low-income areas, and 55% of the members offer green lending products. Next slide. The climate crisis is a challenge like no other. Tackling it will require innovative, coordinated, multi-sectoral approaches and partnerships that include creative entrepreneurs with technological solutions to advance climate action. Innovating things differently using emerging technologies, climate tech focuses on the redesign of systems at the root of our climate crisis and embedding social equity to help accelerate its critical impact. The climate tech ecosystem creates technologies and products that are explicitly focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions or addressing the impacts of global warming. Next slide. We are at a crossroads. The clear message from the chaotic events of our global space, ocean, air, and natural disasters is in favor of collective action to address climate change to safeguard our shared living space. What role can planners, local leaders, businesses, and all stakeholders play in advancing and vigorously championing racial equity and equal opportunities for underserved communities? Planners can help local leaders to be a driving force in addressing climate change in frontline communities. Now is the time to take the necessary steps to better position your cities, towns, and communities to secure upcoming funding. We hope this discussion inspires forward-looking and people-centered resilience planning approaches that platform the interconnected systems that are key drivers of climate action. Thank you for joining this discussion. Next slide. Let me introduce our speakers today. Up next, Melissa Unimore-Hamp, partner with Skog Rasmussen LLC. She brings decades of public, private, and nonprofit experience, providing expertise and grants technical assistance services, as well as improving the capacity of government and nonprofit sectors to collaborate and to apply and implement federal grants. Big job. She launched the Federal Funds Technical Assistance Program for the National Nonprofit Urban Sustainability Directors Network, an organization with 250 plus local government members across the US and Canada, and offers a similar program for the American Cities Climate Change Challenge funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. Our next second speaker is Stephanie Nguyen, Director of External Affairs for Elemental Accelerator. Elemental Accelerator is a nonprofit investor in climate tech for social change, an ecosystem of innovation that centers equity in their climate solutions and actions, with a portfolio of 150 companies in all 50 states and 95 countries. As partnerships are the key to success, Tiffany works to weave together a network of mission-aligned partners to bring climate tech solutions to scale and to implement around a core vision of clean, vibrant, and equitable community in Hawaii. Melissa?
Thank you, Ramona. I really appreciate that. Amazing insights for what we're going to be talking about in our presentations and in the Q&A later. So I am on the island of Maui. We are very much as an island community aware of the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And so this is very much on a personal level, something very important to me. But so thank you for the opportunity to talk about some of the keys to increasing federal resources for projects that can make an impact on that in a meaningful way for our climate future. So by way of background, I was on Capitol Hill for 11 years, working both in the House and the Senate, putting funding into different federal programs and helping entities access that funding. Then I was at a national nonprofit working to ensure the stability of large national streams of funding. And then in the private sector since 2008, working on federal government relations and grants, both here, both in DC and here in Hawaii. So it's really great to be able to bring together the lessons learned at the intersection of these various sectors to all of you today. And some of you, again, what Ramona was talking about is, from a national perspective through the USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So representing more than 270 communities across the US and Canada. Some of you may be a part of that. Terrific resources through that organization. And what we've really been doing is helping various cities and counties pursue funding through that technical assistance program that is available. I'm also part of the State Funding Readiness Project under Huanani Partnership. That's providing similar grants technical assistance to states and communities that those states would like to support. So that's also available. So you'll see some specific examples of success under those and other programs toward the end of my slides. But as Ramona said, this is all about putting the pieces together now so that we can meet this moment with all of these unique federal resources flowing and ensure that the needs in our communities are met. So of course, many of the projects we are thinking of that would make that kind of large impact are very, very large and will take tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases to start and complete. Moving roads and other infrastructure inland as we're anticipating sea level rise, or electrifying our buildings or fleets, or encouraging community solar programs, or planting millions of trees to ensure some canopy to mitigate heat effects. Some of the best ways we'll be able to fund climate solutions like these will be through braiding different streams of funding. And all of these benefit from a holistic and comprehensive approach in planning. So for instance, with the bipartisan infrastructure law to date, out of the 1.2 trillion in transportation, energy, water, and other areas of funding, more than 280 billion has been announced for states, tribes, territories, and local governments. But there is so much more that will be available through thousands of other, to thousands more recipients. And there are a few guides that I'll put in a bit later if I can to allow you to find the resources that have already been secured and others yet to come, several of them on the White House build page, and there's some maps of progress there as well, some from the National League of Cities and then from the USDN. So some of you, may have been tracking the congressional news and are seeing efforts through annual appropriations bills, particularly from the House, to strip some of the bill and IRA funding. There are also efforts to use the funding levels included in the hard-fought debt limit agreement as ceilings instead of floors, which translates into even deeper cuts. There are also provisions being put into these bills that would include blanket prohibitions on the use of funds for certain purposes, such as those related to climate change, environmental justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's anticipated that these measures won't pass in the current form in the Senate or be signed by President Biden as currently written. And who knows how far they'll get, given that the House had to break early for the August recess after being unable to pass a mostly non-controversial agricultural appropriations bill. But wherever you stand on any of these, it's important, especially for those of you who care about retaining provisions proposed for cuts or elimination, to make your views known to your congressional delegation. Okay, enough said about that. But so when we talk about braiding, we can focus on comprehensive approaches to things like energy issues. So for instance, $550 million for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant from Bill, for which applications for the competitive portion are being finalized now and regular formula allocations being obtained. So some of you may be going after that funding. Those can be paired with energy tax incentives and rebates through IRA, which can be braided with funding from regular competitive and formula grants, such as the State Energy Program, or even earmarks, now called congressionally directed spending or community project funding, which could also be woven together with non-federal funding, such as that through the Energy Foundation, maybe elemental accelerators you'll hear, and others. And this all may seem overwhelming, but how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, as they say. And you can get to this via braiding, particularly to positively impact our underserved communities that often lack basic infrastructure. Let's talk a bit about collaboration. So nowadays, you can live and die by the collaborations you're working through in the federal grants process. As Ramona talked about, there are several that are active under the GGRF, but more and more grants are pointing applicants to coming together, as collaborations can, when done right, mean many good things for the final impact of the federal dollar. They can have more practicality in that there are more eyes looking at what's being proposed from multiple points of view so that the solutions can actually be implemented, which can also help ensure the longevity of project outcomes. And when all of the relevant stakeholders are involved, community members, government at multiple levels, nonprofits, private investors, this can also result in solutions with a better level of buy-in, as well as more and multiple resources to help finish the job. And then when projects are conceived thoughtfully, they also have greater potential impacts to get at systemic issues and make room for generative innovation versus staying with the same old models that may have been tried and true in decades past, but things have changed. Those don't necessarily work in this world, and we have to be innovative. So we've seen calls for collaboration in more and more grants, such as the EPA Thriving Communities grants or various Department of Energy grants, where teaming is encouraged. We also see more funding going to metropolitan planning organizations or MPOs that represent regional planning and collaboration. So some of you may be in that kind of process right now to team, and that's excellent. So it's really about looking to the successful partnerships and collaborations you've already been in, making the most of those so that you can talk about the history that you've had together and have a more competitive application. And if you feel like you haven't done enough of this kind of coalition building, now is not too late to start. Okay, now that we've talked about collaboration, what to do next. So here are just a few lessons learned that have been key in the projects we've worked on, and that's been a working knowledge of the grants process paired with a good level of effort. And those of you who have gone after and secured competitive grants know that a solid grant application takes a good amount of time, a few months, maybe even a year in some cases, as well as mental and physical effort to get to the level where it can be funded. So now some start with a grant opportunity, but I actually like to start with a fundable idea. It's important to begin with the community need or problem that generates that funding idea, be it to address water quality issues or build resilience hubs or encourage better pre-disaster mitigation that can then be tested and refined and supported through meaningful community outreach. The other thing I like to do is to link it to a plan. Ones that we've always been afraid will be just published and then sit on the shelf. Climate action plans, Vision Zero plans, comprehensive economic development strategies. Your application will be much more competitive if it's shown to further the goals of the plan that was developed and driven through meaningful community and stakeholder processes. So you can take ideas from those plans and cite those as the backbone or impetus for the projects you propose, then match them to the funding streams. Otherwise, you risk chasing the money, which can mean if you get the grant in the end, you can't implement it, or it takes you so far off course as an entity. So that's why you start with the idea. Once you have that idea, you can match it up to funding opportunities on trackers like the ones I mentioned and go forth to apply. And it's really important to envision the fit of the idea in both the short and long-term scenarios. And finally, it's important to acknowledge that some of the funding opportunities are not removed from politics. Some just go through a merit review, like those with the National Science Foundation, and others have a political layer of evaluation, such as transportation infrastructure grants through what was Tiger, was Build, now it's called RAISE, and you need to advocate for your projects. It's good to know what kind of funding you're working with and act accordingly. And some of this may be talking to your congressional delegation. You know, it's important to let them know about your projects and the federal funding you're pursuing so they can help you think about the best avenue to pursue. And maybe they can make that crucial call to the agency at the appropriate time or express support in letters. Okay, one of the major ways to ensure competitiveness in the grants process, as Ramona was mentioning, particularly with the Biden-Harris administration, is to focus on the Justice 40 communities. Those, again, who are underserved, those who have been overburdened by pollution over time. So if you've written any federal grant applications recently, you know that the Biden administration has aimed to embed environmental justice in the work of federal agencies, focusing on bringing clean energy and healthy environments to all, and recognizing, undoing, and mitigating harm to those who have suffered from toxic pollution and other environmental burdens like climate change. So in order to ensure J40 representation in your grants, it's important to first identify communities in need if you don't already know who they are, or at least identify the base criteria for the disadvantaged or underserved communities you wish to reach. And there are several tools out there. There's a Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CJEST, which may not be perfect for your community, but it does have a load of data indicating why a certain area, at least from the federal perspective, could be considered disadvantaged. And this is in relation to national standards. You could also look at the EJ Screen Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool. There's a US DOT Federal Highway Administration Planning and Equity Tool. There's so many, but you could also use your state or local sources, which of course could be more up to date, more granular. But whichever way you go, it's important to cite the source, include maps showing your proposed project in relation to things like areas of persistent poverty and the like, to bring things to life for the grant review panel. And once you know what communities to focus on, you can then design purposeful community outreach. And my colleagues at Skog Rasmussen have done a ton of this in energy, broadband, civic participation, just to name a few. And it's hard work, hard work to find the groups and the individuals to speak to, figure out how to reach them, determine what to ask them, and then determine how to ensure their voices are integrated into final plans and recommendations. It also takes a boatload of coordination and time. So there's a fine line between doing all of that through intentional engagement and just checking the box. So for instance, my colleagues and I have been working intensively in the broadband space. We know there are a lot of geographic areas that we'd like to reach, rural and remote areas, but they don't have broadband access or even devices. And so, it's insensitive to put out an online survey as your means of collecting data. And I did see that in one of the grant applications I was working on. So sometimes it's really about finding the right people who come from those communities who can both carry the message as well as bring back the message about what will work in very specific, measurable, actionable ways. And then finally, it's about ensuring actual integration into proposed budgets. And unfortunately, I've seen applications where they say they're talking about these communities and taking the needs of those communities into account, but then they don't build any money for that kind of outreach into the project budget. And current guidelines are to bring such communities into the conversation early in a true co-creation process from initial planning and design through implementation. So only then will you be in true partnership with underserved communities and be able to bring them lasting change. Okay, in the last few slides in my part of the presentation, I'd like to put this all together and cite a few examples of how we've been able to use some of the key lessons learned and open the doors to federal opportunities. So as I mentioned, we've been providing federal funding technical assistance services through USDN, where we provide coaching and consultation, grant writing, reviews, and edits to ensure responsiveness, quality and compliance, and submission support. So with this model, we've built the support further, again, as Ramona mentioned, to the American Cities Climate Challenge, which ended, but we've got some good results from that. And together we've been able to help participants secure funding for neighborhood weatherization, complete and safer streets, and additional technical assistance to southeastern states through the EPA, and also broadband. And I have West Coast and Hawaii examples here. A recent example of success that's not on this slide is pretty exciting, as I was able to play a small part in the newly awarded EPA Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers program. One particular project awarded to the International City County Management Association, ICMA, in partnership with USDN, and another national nonprofit client, the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, also the National League of Cities and Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. So this represents a substantial investment in help to underserved communities to pursue additional federal dollars. And that's still in the works and should be launched momentarily. And another very new success is a multi-jurisdictional application, very exciting, led by the city of Tucson for other Arizona and some New Mexico cities that was awarded funds through the DOE Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation, or RESI program. Although codes may not be the sexy headline-grabbing items, you all nonetheless know just how important it can be to impact systems change through building code revisions and the like. And so this is the kind of change we want to effect, which will solidify resilience measures way into the future. In more examples of success local to Hawaii that are reflective of what can be done in other states, the state of Hawaii, through the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, has knit together a major hui, as we say, or club or association in Hawaiian language, that has been meeting every week with few exceptions since the beginning of COVID, when the weaknesses in our broadband coverage were brought to light via the need to work remotely and enter into distance learning. So fast forward to today, the hui has more than 550 members. It brings together state and county officials, congressional offices, federal program officers, academia, such as the University of Hawaii system, and service providers like Charter, Spectrum, and Hawaiian Tel, nonprofit community-based organizations, Native Hawaiian organizations, so many others. It's really amazing. And this is including those who directly represent underserved communities, such as Hawaiian homelands. So, we are working on in a massive coalition to enroll people in the FCC Affordable Connectivity Outreach Program, obtain funding in digital equity, and look ahead to about 150 million or maybe more in broadband infrastructure monies to come. So this continues to be a true success story that keeps equity top of mind, and hoping that that's a good example for other states. But then switching gears, we've been able to work with our local municipalities to obtain federal investments in water conservation, reuse, and recharge. This includes a new EPA Environmental Finance Center, one of 29 centers recently designated that will be up and running through the Hawaii Community Foundation and allow entities to better access to water resources. Okay, in this last slide of my section, I'd like to discuss the Huanai'ani Partnership State Funding Readiness Program. And through this group, we work directly with states or local governments if the state wants to support those partners, and the same kind of grant strategy, ideation, grant writing, grant reviewing, and grant editing that we offer through the other programs. And we're happy to announce that we reached success in helping the City and County of Honolulu win a $25 million DOT RAISE grant to erect a new pedestrian bicycle bridge that will link the famous Waikiki area with neighborhoods and the University of Hawaii. And the project itself had been a long time in the making, and it's gratifying that it will finally be built with the help of the federal government. But it took quite a team effort to get that grant together. And then finally, those nonprofits or nonprofit partners aimed at federal funding are also being helped. And this is a model, again, hoping that this is something that could be replicated in other areas. But this provides assistance through the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations. And there are counterpart organizations in every state, I think. And in our case, Hano has been helping community-based partners secure funding for a wide diversity of projects, from economic development to arts and humanities, to community composting, to education and others. And several of these would not have succeeded without partnerships between municipal and local governments and the nonprofit community. And we address the need for this, via capacity building work that brings everyone together that collaboration is really very difficult to find time for and resources for. And so that's truly important for a more competitive application. So bottom line, there are ways to successfully pursue and secure additional federal dollars using a few basic processes, tools, and efforts to meet our climate moment. And with that, happy to turn it over to Tiffany for the next part of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's always great to hear about all the work that you're doing around helping to secure funding for states. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having us here today. It's great to be here to just talk a little bit more about our work. And it was really interesting to see in the poll earlier that only about a quarter of the group here is actively working with climate technologies that you know of. So kudos to all of you, and love to hear about what some of those things are. And for the rest of the group who weren't sure if they're working with climate technologies or are not yet, I think you might be surprised at how big this universe of technologies really are, and how many things intersect with all the things that we touch, feel, and interact with every day. So go to the next slide here. So a little bit about Elemental Accelerator. We started back in 2009 out of something called the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. And that was when Hawaii became the first state in the nation to legislate our intent to flip our economy off of fossil fuels. Soon after, California came along and other states. And when we made that pledge, two of the things that we saw as kind of like gaps to reach those clean energy goals, one was technology and the other was funding. So that's really the gap that Elemental exists to fill. So we did start in Hawaii, but as Ramona mentioned earlier, we now work globally. We have over 150 companies in our portfolio, or 150 companies that we've invested in over the past dozen or so years, and have deployed over 100 projects all around the world to help prove out those technologies. You can go to the next slide here. So, the reason why we exist is because we know that climate change is here and we need to act urgently to solve it. And the reason why we work with entrepreneurs is because we truly, truly believe that they are wired to do it at the pace that is needed. So a lot of entrepreneurs are, technical founders, or they come in not wanting to start a business, but they really just see the need for a solution with something in their community or market. And that's why we're really excited to work with entrepreneurs to help them scale their solutions to make impacts that will help bring more sustainable solutions to market. Next slide. So the areas that we invest in are the highest emitting greenhouse gas emission industries out there. So you see we started off by investing in energy companies, but pretty soon after we started, we quickly saw that energy has such a strong nexus to all the other things that we interact with every day. So then we started to expand our investments into transportation and mobility, water, food and agriculture, circular economy or industry, and most recently, nature-based solutions. And we see these huge buckets here, but what does that actually mean, right? So we always say at Elemental that we take a really holistic approach to how we tackle climate change. So if you look at any one of these sectors, and let's take mobility for an example, we don't just invest in like electric vehicle chargers. When we take a look at our mobility portfolio, we invest from everything from, EV infrastructure, but also multimodal transportation, like bike sharing solutions, or aviation solutions such as hybrid electric or hydrogen electric airplanes or sustainable aviation fuels. So that's just one example of how we don't invest in any one part of any of these sectors, but really try to invest in it to make systems change impacts. Another example of energy, which is also very, very broad, is a company called Nth Cycle, who harvests additional critical minerals and mine waste from used lithium ion batteries in like smartphones. You know, we know that with the shift to electrifying all things, batteries will play a much larger role. So looking at like what is the second or third or fourth life of a battery, not only in your electric vehicle, but also in something like your phone. And next slide, please. So I talked a lot about, you know, how we invest in startups. We quickly found after first year of just kind of like handing out grant money to startups that, you know, you can't just give a company funding and expect them to be successful. We really had to iterate on ourselves, and in addition to the funding, provide wraparound services to really help these companies succeed. So like I said, a lot of the entrepreneurs that come into this place or space are technical founders. They don't know how to run a successful business. They might not have a network in the community or in the industry that will help them to be successful. And that's where Elemental comes in. So we help provide, you know, tools and frameworks and actually make introductions to private, public, community partners to help elevate the work that they're doing. A couple of the other wraparound services that we help to provide is in 2021, you know, we really started leaning into policy as one of the main levers in tackling this climate change issue. And so we launched something called the Policy Lab. So every year we bring on about 5 to 6 pretty senior policy fellows, and they are either entrepreneurs or ex-policy wonks who have come up against barriers in this innovation space. And they propose work plans, like a year-long work plan to help bring down some of those barriers to innovation and actually work with legislators to help achieve some of those goals. We also really believe in diversifying the industry. So we have a career pathways program with a mission to inspire 500 climate careers in the next couple years and directly fund, inspire 10,000 climate careers in the next couple years and actually directly fund 500 of them. So one of the ways that we do that is through our internship program, which I'll share a little bit more about later. And with everything that we do, we center equity and access at its foundation. So we've come up with a couple of frameworks to help companies really embed diversity, equity, inclusion in the beginning of their startup journey, as opposed to it being a check the box or an afterthought. And if you're interested in, you know, just learning more about some of the trends in the space or taking deep dives into some of these technologies, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. If you just go to elementalaccelerator.com/newsletter, I don't think we spam people, but we do share just really useful insights. And sometimes we have online events that take deeper dives into some of these climate trends. Next slide, please. So how do we actually work with companies? So there are 2 ways that we engage with startups. Every year, you know, we bring 15 to 20 new companies into our portfolio, or our ohana, as we say in Hawaii. And they can come to our portfolio by applying to one of two tracks. Every year, we get anywhere between 400 to 600 or more applicants. And we open applications up just once a year in the spring, and then take the entire summer to do our due diligence and typically announce our new cohort in the fall. So it's actually coming up here in a few weeks. But the first track that companies can apply to is called our strategy track. And that's kind of more like our typical coaching 101, how to be a successful startup. We provide services with coaching from everything around like messaging. So some marketing there, to sales and operational scale up, to fundraising in the venture sense. And that is a 9-month program. And we fund companies up to $350,000 to go through that program with us. The second track here is called our project track. And that's for like more mature stage companies that are ready to either, like make some type of like product or market pivot. And those are companies that are wanting to work deeply in a geography to really prove out their technology. So maybe they're on like their first project deployment, second or third. And those first 3 project deployments are really key to their ability to be able to scale and prove out their solution. So we come in with $1 million to help de-risk that project for a customer. And typically projects are about 2 million plus. So, we used to fully fund projects at one point, but we found that if customers or municipalities don't have skin in the game, then it's really hard to bring a project to completion. So one of the questions that we always get is, do you take equity in these companies? So we are a nonprofit investor, but we do take equity in the company. So that's the typical 1 to 3%. The tool that we use is a SAFE, and that's basically just a form of debt for the companies. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier, that we embed equity and access at the foundation of everything that we do. So Elemental has a framework for how to build diversity, equity, inclusion into a company's DNA at the team, leadership, and board levels as early as possible. We require all startups to structure equity and access into their development plans, and we understand that companies come into this work at varying degrees of lived experience, but we encourage all of our project track companies to deploy in frontline communities. And what does that mean? Frontline communities, both Ramona and Melissa talked a little bit about that. They're typically communities that are experiencing climate change first and worst, but typically some of the last to be able to benefit from some of these solutions because of socioeconomic, barriers, or they're just in often underserved and low-income communities. So part of the process is assessing the potential unintended consequences that some of the startup solutions or business models may create as well. So scaling their technology relies on how they deploy. So again, Melissa talked about, like being really genuine in how you interact with communities that you want to work with. And that requires, building relationships early and engaging often. So Elemental helps our entrepreneurs integrate equity and access early by helping them partner successfully with community partners that could be nonprofit, government agencies, and community-based organizations by building principles of equity and access into its projects. And we track them alongside what we call our commercial inflection points. Next slide. So one of the frameworks that we use to ensure, companies are thinking about equity and access is something called our square partnerships model. So typically, when you look at any project deployment, there's the startup with the solution or someone with a solution, right? And then you have a customer, and then you have some type of funding mechanism sometimes, if it's not directly from the customer itself. But you typically do not see a community partner. And this is where we require, for that fourth edge of the square, to have some type of community partner. And it's not enough to just have a few conversations with them. As part of our funding, we actually have increased our funding year on year to help resource that fourth community partner corner of the square more and more. So for every project, we require that our startups are honoring the time and expertise that the community partner or community partners are spending on this project. Next slide, please. So here are a couple examples of projects that we've done in the real world. And like I said, climate technologies are very wide universe. So hopefully this is a pleasant surprise to all of you about some of the things that are actually considered climate technologies. So in the top left corner, we have Numina. And they're a street sensor solution. So Numina deploys street level sensors that empower cities with data to become more walkable, bikeable, responsible. The photo there is actually a project that they deployed with our support in Kuala Lumpur. And the city, they said that it's a really practical solution that delivered immediate benefits to Kuala Lumpur citizens and city planners. And it also exhibited potential for more future-proofing mobility in large cities. And they're really excited about the possibilities and engagement going forward. So using the sensor, the data that they collect highlights multimodal transportation's opportunities and risks. In the top right, that orange box is the company called Carbon Cure. So I never thought I would be so excited to talk about cement. But I think this is a truly transformational solution. So what Carbon Cure does is they take recycled cement and they actually infuse it or trap it, or recycled carbon. They take recycled carbon, trap it in cement. So with Carbon Cure, we did a project actually in Honolulu in partnership with the Department of Transportation. And they ended up doing a side-by-side for one of the new highways that we were building of Carbon Cure cement and the regular cement that they typically use. And they actually found that not only was Carbon Cure solution greener and ended up actually being stronger, but it was also at cost parity. So there's almost no reason why we shouldn't be using this type of solution in all of our new builds. And actually from this project, it inspired us to create a resolution here locally. And that year, I think it was 2018, the Conference of Mayors was actually held in Honolulu. And at that conference, all of the mayors, over 100 mayors in attendance, unanimously passed that same resolution in their own jurisdictions. And I know states like New York are actually much farther along in making it getting it close to being made a bill. So that's really exciting. The bottom left corner here is a solution called Source. So it looks like solar panels, but they're actually hydro panels. And what they can do is create clean drinking water from just the sun and water from the atmosphere. So this is a really great solution for rural areas or areas that have difficulty accessing clean drinking water. And this is a project that we deployed in Australia in a community that typically would have had to have water actually trucked in on plastic water bottles trucked in by the pallet. So there's just that journey of getting water to this community alone, there's so many carbon emissions, and then also waste from all of the plastic water bottles that it took to, resource this area. So this array actually not only now brings clean drinking water to the area, but it was an economic development and workforce development opportunity that popped up as well, because now this community has their own clean drinking water, but they also started selling the bottled water and its aluminum bottles that are reusable to local hotels. So there's a lot of win-win-wins that happen in that scenario. The bottom right here is called, this is a company called Uni, and they're bike pods. So, in the US, about 50% of our car trips are under 3 miles. So this is one way that cities can decarbonize transportation by creating infrastructure networks for bicycles, scooters, and other sustainable modes of transportation. And I know in some of the larger cities, again, I think New York has had a lot of issues with unregulated e-bikes and like e-bike fires that have been really catastrophic. So this is one solution that you can safely store some of these bikes. Next slide, please. So I think, yeah. So I mentioned earlier, we really focus on diversifying the industry through our career pathways program. So we have a program called EDICT, which is Empowering Diverse Climate Talent. And I mentioned this because not only do students get placed either at Elemental or one of our 150 portfolio companies, but we actually partner with just any like-minded organization that can be public or private that is interested in taking this pledge with us. And so if you have space for an intern or, something next summer and you are interested in joining this mission with us, again, you can sign on to our newsletter, and when the opportunity or call out for organizations to bring on interns happens, you can work with us in helping to diversify the industry. Next slide. I think this is the end of the presentation. Yep. So again, hopefully this was helpful to all of you, but if you are currently working with startups in your areas, would also love to hear about the type of work that you're doing. And we have tons of information on our website about different companies and solutions and case studies as well. So feel free to browse around. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ramona.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you so much, Melissa, both of you, for enhancing and expanding the conversation. I think we've got some questions. Is that correct, Christine?
Yes. And folks, as you come up with questions, just go ahead and type them into the Q&A. I will also be throwing some links into the chat box for everyone that Melissa has for you. So I'll do that in a moment because I can't do two things at once. Let's get to some questions. The first one I think is going to be for Tiffany. How big is the climate tech economy? And how many nonprofits really are there in that area?
Yeah, great question. I don't know how many nonprofits are in the area, but it's growing. We consider ourselves a nonprofit investor, so there's a lot more data around like the VC space. So in 2021, and it's similar numbers in 2022, there's about 90 billion that was invested in climate technologies. And just to put it in perspective, the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, is infusing about 36 billion a year for the next decade to help with climate technologies. So you can just see that multiple is almost 3 times as much currently that's happening in just venture capital funding. And there are a lot more nonprofits and working in this space than there were in previous years. And I actually do think that philanthropy will play a really, really key role in helping to add to that capital stack, or as Melissa was talking about, like braiding funding, you know, to help really elevate this space.
Christine, I want to add to that. So I guess the emphasis here is really to take a look at, because to put your arms around something like climate change, it's so huge as we're experiencing our heat and you know, drinking a lot of water and frying an egg in the ground or whatever it is. We really need to think, and I hate to use this well-worn phrase, out of the box. We need to move from our comfort zone and take a look at the ways that we can respond, and it needs to be an ecosystem. It needs to be broader than we've traditionally addressed planning or development, community development type of issues. And we also need to look at a variety of different partners that we've never done before. And the thing about climate action or climate tech, and especially on nonprofit end, so it's beyond just venture capital, right? It's investments with a cause. It's investment in people, and our approaches should be this people-centered approach. And the one thing that I think Melissa brings to the table is that people-centric approach, combined with nonprofit climate tech, can help us, as we say, braid, weave, create a strategy that can work for our community. You know your communities better than everybody else, right? And you know the networks of people who are there. How do you bring them to the table, and how do you enhance some of their solutions with relationships that haven't been there before? And how do you spark that ingenuity and that thinking, looking at things differently? I think that that's really what we want to stir with this conversation. Off my little pole, my little speechy thing there, Christine, sorry.
And honestly, I would even add to that. You know, I was just doing some homework, writing an introduction to a book and kind of looking back at the history of city planning in the United States and kind of how things led to what happened. And one of the most interesting things was, you know, in the 40s and the 50s, planning started to get super unpopular. And especially by the 60s, you know, there were just a lot of issues going on. But then, you know, when the EPA came out, when the EPA was established, all of a sudden, like, planners became niche-y almost. And then all of these like little arms of planning started coming out. And, you know, transportation planning versus your equity planning. Or my whole point is, I feel like we're sort of at a nexus now where we're ready to do that. We're going to be doing that again, where, you know, we're facing these new things that are requiring us to not continue how we have in the past. And I sort of feel like we're just at this new space where we do need to collaborate with people and organizations that we traditionally don't. So it's almost like a sort of a shift is starting to occur in our field, for better or worse. Maybe some people aren't too interested in it, but it is what it is. So that's interesting.
We're being pushed into that arena for many cases, right? And right. The weather that we've had this summer certainly is exposing us to what can happen when we don't get our acts together and we don't work quick enough. And so we need to not only grasp new solutions, we also need to fine tune them, and we need to be more people sensitive. And then, I mean, let's face it, if there's federal money out there, let's figure out a strategy to get it, because it may not be there again. And how do we do that? And how do we also build internal capacity in our organizations, in our institutions, to be able to receive that funding?
And if I could just add to that, I mean, definitely with some of the threats that I was speaking about, some of the potential cuts that have been proposed to a lot of these programs, I mean, the urgency is now. And I know the agencies are doing the best to try to push some of this money out the door, even, faster than some of the cycles we've seen in previous years. And so really meeting that and bringing your projects to meet whatever the federal agency is looking for and being a good partner for that right now. This is the moment to do that.
What is generative innovation? What does that mean? Give us an example.
Well, so I would offer up what Elemental has been, investing in. Really, it's things that will generate product, something that you can actually bring out to the market that, speaks to a lot of these things, these priorities that we've been discussing, especially in the climate area. So, that versus, things that maybe just these ideas sit there and do nothing, right? So it is, Elemental is the example of that, but maybe others can add.
Yeah, and it really bubbles from the basic community needs, right? And the idea about that there's no one path for a solution or an answer. And the other thing that I like that Elemental has mentioned is that it really takes, a whole ecosystem of solutions and a lot of people involved in thinking through these things. And the more we can involve new generations, new people, new expertise, bring it to table, and that mix and stuff can only expose us to solutions that we have never thought of. And the heat that we're going through, granted, in Hawaii, it's not as hot as the mainland, really demands that we pay attention and that we become more than uncomfortable because of the weather, right? But really taking a look at who's not at the table, and how is this the time for us to really take a look at building our capacity? Is there money that we can do that? Do we need to change our infrastructure? Is this the time that we need to take a look at adding new systems and technologies and stuff that we've been trying to upgrade, but we haven't done before, and do it with an expedition that we've never done before too, right? So.
So the next series of questions are really based on the nuances of a grant, I guess. So the first one, with unprecedented levels of funding becoming available for planning related initiatives, how do we coordinate our application efforts so we're not competing with entities within like the same region for the same type of projects? Whereas otherwise, if we would have known that each other were each applying for this, we would have put our heads together, coordinated, and made a bigger impact in the end. So
Yeah,
how do we coordinate this? What do we do?
Sure. And I know this is a difficult question because, people don't necessarily want to show their cards. I understand that everybody's going for the same limited pots of money. But given that these are such large, these large funding streams, there is just this need to coordinate. So, the broadband HUI that I mentioned, I mean, that's just an excellent example of how, that's brought cross-sector discussions together from an earlier time so that they'd be ready for the funding opportunities once they are there. So, it's starting early with the conversations, figuring out how those relationships need to be knit together, and doing actual real projects on the ground, like affordable connectivity, pop-ups and things. So you get to know each other. I mean, that whole relationship building really does take time, and then there's a trust there. And then you're sharing information about, hey, are you going after solar fall? Oh yeah, I am. Oh well, maybe I shouldn't actually, because you're going to do it. And so let's coordinate and have letters of support between each other and actually write each other into our budgets and things like that, right? I mean, it just does take time. Versus, some of these applications I've seen where they're like, oh, 2 weeks until the due date. Let's go ahead and ask, the community-based organization down the street. Maybe they want to partner now. It's like 2 weeks, So, it is relying on taking a stock of the collaborations, the relationships you have now. Can we just forward those? But also, I know there are organizations and some government entities that are trying to find the resources to pay for that convening time to be able to bring people in like areas together so that you can have that kind of conversation and make it real. So yeah, it takes time, effort, money, all of that. It's hard. There's no easy example really to do that. It takes the effort. But maybe Ramona, Tiffany can speak to that.
So oftentimes, I think now with this new funding, you'll notice in the NOFOs that what gives the edge to many applications is really the regional perspective, the broader perspective, so that it will have a larger impact, that it recognizes the connections that are between, land uses and communities, that it can be iterated throughout so that it's not just a one-time solution. And then the other thing about is building, I always say that about the building capacity, is really taking a look at how do you sustain, and do you have the boots in the ground or the people on the ground to be able to move this thing forward once the funding is over? Do you have the capacity to manage the funding? How can you get that capacity? And philanthropy is becoming much more active in these areas than ever before. And who are those partners that you can have on a regional basis? And is there a combination of private sector businesses that could be involved in this? And it's really amazing that some of the people who have actually been on the ground with these types of solutions have but didn't quite have the wherewithal to really administer a large grant, have really gotten stronger with these coalitions, with these relationships. And so that's why I put out those couple of coalitions that are focusing on that EPA grant, because it's an opportunity, it's another lever, and it allows you to gain the strength of success and build those relationships that you may not have right now. And as you know, during the pandemic, CDFIs, the Community Development Finance Institutions, were very successful in terms of they're really the boots in the ground. They're most familiar with the businesses or the communities in terms of need. And those types of conversations in applying for a federal grant are vitally important, because the federal government wants to know that you have really embedded the overused two words, lived experience, in the solutions that you are coming up and the strategies that you're coming up. So the more that you can broadcast, the more that you can break out and create these new relationships and bring them to the table, the more it positions you better to have a more competitive application.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly double tap on what both of them just said. I actually just got an email this morning asking, oh, are you guys going after this like NOAA grant opportunity? And because I've been talking to other people, or other people have been asking me like, oh, we're thinking of going after this. Are you guys going after this too? We weren't going after that one, but I could quickly say like, no, but I think this person is. So if you haven't reached out to them already, chat with them, because a lot of these grants that are coming out right now encourage partnership. So just tap into your existing networks and talk to people. I think it's a very different landscape right now with competitiveness than it was in previous years or historically.
Yeah, people need to break out of their silos. It's really what it is, right? It's calling for a different dynamic among all of us now.
So in regards to reaching out to potential partners and, kind of coordinating the efforts, let's say that you're a primary on one type of funding through an agency, and then you might be like a secondary on another grant. Like, can you stack grants like that, funding opportunities?
So it's going to depend. I mean, you can't ask for the same work, the same project, right? You don't want to get into double jeopardy and you get both of them funded, and then, what do you do there? You're in trouble. But, there are projects that can be phased. You can have different maybe geographic areas that you're pointing at, different types of population groups that you might be pointed at. So as long as you're kind of dissecting those, I think there is a way to braid things that way. certainly, but yeah, avoid trying to get the same, 2 different grants for the same project.
So in order to support climate tech companies, how can cities, municipalities, regional bodies help? And I guess what are the on-ramps for climate tech finance?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, like the first 3 deployments are really crucial for climate tech companies. And I think that's really where planners can come in to support pilot projects, So in order for technologies to contribute to climate impact, they first need to get like a first, second, third commercial scale deployment or project deployment to be able to get to that scale. So the faster that these entrepreneurs can get through the commercialization inflection points and become leaders in the market, the more climate impact they can deliver. So partnerships in the beginning are really key. So if you can be open to talking to startups, and there are ways that you can diligence them, right? Like there are industry professionals that can look at the technology and be like, okay, like this seems like it could work, or like this seems like it's a little early. So again, tap into those networks and just kind of use some of that common sense to see like where some of those next steps could be, or tap into your local like accelerator or incubator programs in your jurisdictions too. They typically will have someone that specializes in those sectors. So you guys play a key role.
If I could just go back for one point of clarification on what I said before, Tiffany's piece is just, in terms of the federal government, making sure that, the federal government isn't putting in double jeopardy, but of course, like elemental, not foundation funding, funding from different levels of government, like all of that, of course, can be braided and stacked for the same project and should be.
And really tying into partners like philanthropy can help to inform, build awareness. They could help educate, series conversations in terms of broadening people's perspective in the community to be able to reach. And the other thing is there's really a big push in terms of workforce development and growing that climate energy sector. So no matter what, if you have actual climate tech businesses or startups in your community, you really want to grow people who are capable and have the skill level to be able to address and adapt to this new workforce and this new industry, right? And so that's another area that these grants are going to be funding. And so you really want to position your community for that, because that really speaks to economic stability, but also economic recovery and community resilience. And as we notice, those are really the key items on the table now more than ever. And so really taking a look at, do you have a local college, a community college? Do you have a university? Do they have a business school? Are they doing incubation? Or is your chamber of commerce incubating new businesses? Making those tie-ins and those kinds of relationships, because it is always surprising how you can discover other people on the same page thinking the same thing, but we're not talking and we don't know that. And for example, like Melissa introduced me to the Hawaii Community Foundation's efforts in terms of water reuse, and just taking a look at water security. And now more than ever, we are confronting how precious water is in so many different ways and so many different avenues. So finding those sort of key partners who can maybe take a piece of the overall context, the overall ecosystem, goes miles in terms of building those relationships, having those strategic conversations that you need, and then being able to always look the long term. What is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and how will we be able to sustain without federal money? I mean, let's face it, administrations change, politics change, priorities change. So we need to be institutionally, wherever we are, nimble and agile, and really not let that arthritis set in of traditional solutions and relationships to address problems. So if there's anything that you should take away from this conversation is how vitally important you need to get that little cleaner out and clean that lens in which you view your solutions and the way you address your problems, and just spark some new energy, because it's really exciting times. I mean, let's face it, it's exciting, fearful, it's all those emotions mixed up in one. But the best thing about it is that the opportunity is there. So seize it while you can. And I think all of us would say that, but I'll leave a last few words for Melissa and Tiffany to add.
Well, I just wanted to say, I'm glad you mentioned water, because that's a perfect example of, there's some municipalities, they'll just keep on sticking to the year after year, the state revolving funds and drinking water and clean water and just do those. But you should look outside. There's Energy Water Nexus, National Science Foundation money, there's Department of Energy money, there's Bureau of Reclamation money for wastewater and other things. There's NOAA funding for some of the coastal communities. So really getting out of your comfort zone. That's really, I think, what we're trying to push here, breaking the silos and not thinking business as usual.
Tiffany?
You two ladies covered it wonderfully.
I think we have time for just one more question, and that is, it's on the Elemental Accelerator. Tiffany, how did funding start? How did we get it going?
Yeah. That's a great question. So we started off by actually getting funding seeded by the Department of Energy. And that was really pivotal to our work. And since then, over the last dozen years or so, we've really, our funding comes from like three major buckets. So with the Department of Energy funding, which turned into Department of Defense funding, really helped to seed us, so we were getting about 5 million like every 5 years. That we've been able to re-up each year in support there. And if you ask like why DoD, the military has tons of assets that they want to make sure are resilient to climate changes. So they see climate as a huge risk. So that's one of the reasons why they've made that investment at that time and continue to do so. Our second bucket is philanthropy. So in 2017, we partnered with Emerson Collective. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. So they are Lorraine Powell Jobs's philanthropic and investment arm. So we partnered with them, and that's when we became Elemental Accelerator. Previously, we were Energy Accelerator, and started to expand our work outside of Hawaii. So that was in about 2017. So that's us taking our model and really scaling it. Our third bucket is corporate. So we, to get this work done, we can't do it on our own. We need partners, real world partners. So that's everyone from, government to corporates like Amazon, Ford, Microsoft, to local banks, to utilities that are really looking at ways to decarbonize their business units and the economy. And we work many times as their innovation arm to help share a lot of the companies or deal flow that we're seeing come through our pipeline.
Okay, perfect timing. It's time to go. Thank you for joining us. This was wonderful. And thank you to the Private Practice Division for hosting this session today. You can register for all of our upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. And this session has been recorded. We'll post it up onto our YouTube channel. Just head over there and search Planning Webcast Series and we'll pop up. Don't forget to log those credits. And everyone have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time. Thank you.
Hi, mahalo.